This is quite an opportunity, and I thank you for it. When Brother Chris called me and said, can you come and speak at our 150th anniversary? How could I say no? I mean, every time I walk into this building, it vibrates with memories for me. As a boy, sitting over here to this side, my mom always had to sit in between my brother and I because we would get into it. If you remember, Dad sang in the choir, and we always sat back there. And what wonderful memories. And then I remember the time.
Did you get your mic on? Sorry.
Oh, it was. It says on.
It says on.
I'll talk loud. And then I remember the time when I was in high school, and I remember the 100th anniversary too, sadly. Sitting back where Jim Meredith is sitting, I felt God tugging at my heart. You know, back then, there's only a couple things we thought God could use us to do, and that was to preach, or to be a missionary or songwriter. Well, I knew I couldn't sing, and I knew probably that God wasn't calling me to be a missionary, so the church licensed me to preach. And but since that time, God has taken me all over the place. As Chris said to you, God opened many doors in my life. I worked for Missouri Baptist for a number of years in institutions raising money and making sure that those institutions kept going. And I never stand in the church and I don't say thank you, because we as Missouri Baptists, although we've had some issues in our past, have supported a lot of good ministries, not because the government told us to, not because someone said we had to, but because we believed God wanted us to. And we supported those ministries, and thank you for that. And then about 10 years ago, when I got tired of running around all over the state of Missouri, we decided we'd come back. Thought we'd always end up in Versailles, but ended up in Camdenton. Now, those of you like Pete think, how in the world did you live in Camdenton? They were our bitter rivals. And believe it or not, 45 years ago, I never thought I'd see Pete Robinson leading in music in church. He was not that kind of guy, but good, Pete. It's good to see that. And we ended up in Camdenton, and I became director of the Lake Ozark Resort Ministry. For those of you that have been around a while, remember when John Ferris was our director of missions and started the Lake Ozark Resort Ministry. I was his first missionary, and God sort of planted that in my heart, and when I had a chance to come back and take that over, we did. We ran that for the last 10 years, but last year, because of insurance purposes and all kinds of stuff that the government makes you do, we stepped away from that and turned that over to Miller County Baptist Association. And so I'm sort of retired and filling in at Lynn Creek. I started filling in down there 10 years ago, and I'm still filling in for them. So. But what a joy to be back here, and Chris asked me to talk about legacy. You know, that's one thing that all of us will leave in our lives, a legacy. You say, well, what is a legacy? A legacy is what lives on after we're gone. A legacy is the memory that we leave behind in the lives of other people. And all of us, whether we want to or not, will leave a legacy. There will be a memory that goes after us once God calls us from this earth. And hearing you all talk today and remembering Roy and Mary, my aunt and uncle. You know, they were my aunt and uncle. They were my dad's sister. Irona Edwards, I don't know if you remember Irona and Roy Edwards. She was my aunt, and all the people that went before us. But not only do people leave legacies, but institutions and churches leave legacies as well. Your legacy, the legacy of this church, is part of my life. As I grew up here, as I remember, and I hope not everybody remembers how I was as a kid, but remember when we were primaries, when they were called primaries and intermediates? We met upstairs, and I don't know how many of you remember Mary Ash. Mary Ash lived above the funeral when people lived in funeral homes. But she loved us to Jesus up there when she taught us, and she loved us and taught us about Christ. And that's a legacy. I'll never forget her. And she's probably been gone forever. But I remember her teaching us up in that little classroom up there, and I'll never forget that. When Paul wrote to Timothy in the second chapter, or the second book that he wrote, the last book that he probably wrote before his death in Rome, Paul wanted to encourage Timothy. Timothy was pastoring a church and having some problems, believe it or not. Not that that happens for pastors. And Paul wanted to encourage Timothy. And Timothy, he says in 2 Timothy chapter 1, Verse 3, he says, I thank God whom I serve as my ancestors did with a clear conscience. As night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers, recalling your tears. I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now dwells in you. So when Paul looked at this young man in the faith, Timothy, he saw not only Timothy, but he saw his mother and he saw his grandmother. Many of us have been blessed with spiritual heritages in our family. Many of you remember my mom and dad and the spiritual heritage that they have left in my life. And it continues to this day. Aunt Mary and Uncle Roy, Aunt Irona and them. But I tell everybody, they were all used to be in the congregation, but now they're all out and back of Hopewell in the cemetery. We go out there on Memorial Day and we can't put enough flowers because there are all kinds of Maxwells out there. And someday I'll probably be out there. But I want you to know I'll leave a legacy. And part of that legacy that I leave in the lives of people that I've come in contact with through the ministry that God has led me to began here in this church. The people that took the time to teach me in Sunday school, the people that took the time to lead me and to share with me, that is a legacy that this church will leave behind. You know, in places that I work with a lot of people to leave legacies. I work with people who left millions of dollars to institutions and have their names written on the walls of those buildings that we built. But you know what? Those kids, especially at the college I worked at, we've built new buildings there, and there's names across the front. Those kids walk in those doors every day, they have no clue who those people are. It's just a name. But I guarantee you that I know the people that touched my life in this church as well. Their name's not written on the front of this building, their name's written in my heart and in my life. It's written in the heart and life of my daughter, and I'm sorry that they couldn't be here today. My wife is involved in resort ministry as well. She's playing the piano at RV parks this morning. And so, you know, that's important. And we have that legacy. And Paul wrote, or the writer of Hebrews, in the 12th chapter of Hebrews, talks about that too, a legacy that we leave as institutions or groups. And he started out in chapter 11 where we talk about that Heroes of Faith chapter. And he gets to chapter 12 and he said, we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. Basically what he's saying is there's a lot of people who have gone before us. He was talking to them about the patriarchs in Israel. He said there's a lot of people who went down this road before you did, and they did what God called them to do. And basically what he's telling his readers, what he's telling us today, it's our turn at the plate today. We have to step up and be the person that God called us to be, because we are going to leave a legacy. People are going to remember us. They're either going to remember us for good or bad. God has given us the chance to make a difference in the lives of people every day. Through what you do in VBS, through what you do in Sunday school and Awanas, through what you do in this church, we will leave a legacy. And someday, as Diana said, I won't be here either 200. Someday someone's going to stand here 200 years, and they're going to mention some of you guys because they remember you and the impact that you had on their lives. I spent a long time traveling the state of Missouri representing Missouri Baptist. But it didn't start when I went to that institution. It started right here at First Baptist Church of the Saints. I heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, where some of you and some of your friends and some of your ancestors taught me and dealt with me, put up with me sometimes, and loved me because of Jesus. And that's the future that you have as well. I guarantee you the legacy you leave will not just be in your family. It will be with children and people who came through this church to be what God called them to be. Paul said, Timothy, he said, I know it resides in you. And I can remember as a boy, my aunt and uncle, and Roy and Mary, and Irona are always here on Sundays. I remember as a boy growing up in this town, we'd go out and my brother and I would play football on Sunday afternoons, and all of a sudden my dad would come to the back porch and whistle. And you know what that meant? That meant, boys, get home because we're going to church tonight. And I remember that we would come here and go to training. You remember Bill and Evelyn Arnold? Bill and Evelyn Arnold taught us in church training. We'd have to stand up and give parts. You remember that? We'd recite parts and do that. When I went to college and we had to take speech, there were people in those college speech classes that would literally get sick because they had to stand up and give a speech. And I thought, well, what's the big deal? Because we did it every Sunday night in church training. I was never afraid to stand up and speak before people because I'd been taught how to do that. We never know what we will do in the lives of other people that will make a difference. And Paul said, Timothy, stir up that faith. Because sometimes in life, we meet challenges that maybe get the best of us, don't we? Whether it be sickness or disease, whatever it might be, sometimes life is tough. I don't have to tell you that. You know that as well as I do. And life was tough for young Timothy. And Paul said, Timothy, stir up that gift of faith that is in you. And I know it's in you because it was in your mom and your grandma. Sometimes in my life when things get tough, I have to stop and say, God, stir up that faith in me. Let that legacy that was left in my life, not only by my mom and dad, not only by my aunts and uncles, but by people in this church that taught me and cared for me, stir up that flame again, God, that I might keep going, that I might go on, that my legacy will outlive me in my life. And that 50 years from now, someone will say, I remember him. I remember him in his life. That's the greatest legacy we will ever leave. Because it'll be written in the hearts. In the second chapter of the book of Luke, you remember, we call it the Christmas story. But literally, as they finish that chapter, you remember the part where it says after the shepherds came and visited Jesus where he was laid, it says that Mary treasured all these things up in her heart. Now, literally in the Greek, that means that Mary made an effort to remember all that happened. She treasured those things. She made an effort to remember those things. You and I need to make effort to remember. We need to make an effort to remember those who have gone before us. We need to make an effort to remember those who were a part of this church and have been a part of the past. And I was looking through the book and I remember a lot of those pastors. And from Charles Sexton on, I remember those pastors in this church and their impact upon me. I remember Archie Warren. I went to his funeral in Columbia several years ago. His daughter still lives down the street from me in Camdenton. I still get to see them. And all of them are a part of my past, but also a part of my right now. And I hope that I leave behind me that legacy that says that church made a difference in my life. I have been all over the state in my travels with the institutions. I preached in churches from Iowa to Arkansas, from Illinois to Kansas, every part of the state. But every time I stand in front of a group, every time I stood in front of a church and preached, it was this church that was always there for me, because this is where I preached my first sermon. This is where God called me into ministry. And I thank you for that. And I don't want to take up a bunch of time, I know we got a lot, but I just wanted to say that you will leave a legacy. Not only as a church, but you will leave a legacy as an individual. People will remember you. I remember people in this church, some of them not real fondly, okay, but some of them fondly. Most of them fondly, but there are some that are not real fond memories of people in this church. I want people to remember me fondly. I want people to say, I remember him, I remember his life, I remember what he did. And that legacy will go on for generation to generation to generation. It will never die. We all will leave there. My question to you is, what kind of legacy will you leave? We need to trust God and let him lead us day by day in the things that he will, wherever we find ourselves, whatever we do. You know, when I went to Southwestern Seminary, everybody wanted to be pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas, because that was the largest church in the convention. Well, guess what? I never pastored the First Baptist Church in Dallas. I pastored the Lynn Creek Baptist Church. which is a smaller church than this. But hey, that's where God's got me. That right now, that's where God's got me. And that's where I need to be, doing all that He's called me to be. And guess what? You're right here, right now. This is where God's got you. Be the person God wants you to be, right here at First Baptist Church in Versailles. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for this opportunity that I've had to come. And Father, just remember. And Father, my mind is full of memories. Father, my body shakes with the things that took place in this building as I recall my past. But Father, help us to remember that not only do we have a past, but we have a right now and we have a future. Father, even a future after we're gone from this earth. A legacy that will outlive us. And Father, I pray that you would speak very loud to us. Father, we'd learn to trust you in our lives, to realize that wherever we are, we're building that legacy. Whatever we do, we are leaving behind memories in the lives of those that come after us. So Father, I thank you. I pray that you continue to bless this body of Christ as they reach out to this community and make a difference right here on this corner. And Father, I thank you through Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. We're going to sing a song of invitation. I think Brother Chris probably will stand down here in front. If God's speaking to you, whatever it might be, if you need to come and you've never accepted Christ, you need to do that today. You need to begin that legacy in Christ today. Or if He's speaking to you about anything else, you need to come and talk to Brother Chris about that. Would you do that as we stand, as Diana leads us?